In the finale of Dune Prophecy's first season, both Harkonnen sisters have the sense that there's something they're missing at different times. While Tula is conferring with the Suk Doctor Nazir, she brings up the viral nightmare and the repeated imagery of the blue eyes in the dark, asking why everyone sees them. Later, when Valya is sharing her plan with Francesca, which turns out to be secretly recorded by Harrow, never trust a Harkonnen, I suppose, she worries that there's a piece on the board just out of view that they're missing. The show's sixth installment is the best TV episode they put together. I was engaged and on the edge of my seat in a way I hadn't been since the third episode. It had reveals, real twists and turns, genuine shocks, dramatic moments that landed, payoffs, and some decent action sequences if that's your thing. And yet the season overall left me feeling like the sisters. Something was missing. Part of that's by design. The show tends to hold back information to create big moments around the reveals. And we know that if they were gambling on getting a second season by not answering every question in the finale, that gamble paid off. The Season 2 renewal announcement came last week before the episode aired. What's funny is that when I was thinking about how to express my mixed feelings before diving into a recap of the best the show has to offer, I started thinking about other situations where I wasn't completely sold on the beginning of something that eventually won me over by the end. And wouldn't you know that Dune came up again. The first film in the latest iteration, released in 2021, ended at a really strange place. As someone who had read the series and was invested enough going into it to know what was coming, I was fine with it. The ornithopters were really cool, and you could say that the world building and atmosphere it created were enough to make it great either way, but it wasn't a complete story. The ending didn't provide the satisfaction you expect from a blockbuster standalone feature. It felt like something was missing. In that case, everything worked out when the complete story was told, so I guess the point is here, let's hope that continues to be a Dune thing going forward. For me, most of the issues with this first season stem from trying to cram something epic into 6 episodes, and the way that this forces creators to prioritize plot advancement and world-building details over character development. I front-loaded this into my episode 1 video so that I wouldn't have to keep mentioning it throughout the season, and I would have been happy to say I was wrong if that were the case, but I'm bringing it up here again so you know where I'm coming from in my assessment of what happened. Because we're watching a prequel and have most of the answers about how things will turn out in 10,000 years when the main series takes place, I like the idea of showing how the sisters' past affect their futures. The episode opens by returning to the point when negotiations broke down between the two factions to which Rachella entrusted her sisterhood. From what we'd seen, Dorotea led the Zealots, who believed in the core principles the Order was built on, but had also been caught up in the Butlerian movement. This made them very anti-technology, which was a real problem for Rachella, who tied her legacy to the breeding program, which relied on the thinking machine Anarul to curate and crunch its data. As a counterbalance, she elevated Valya Harkonnen, who knew about her computer and who had presented a strong will that the Mother Superior believed would be necessary. Both women had survived the Rossack poison to become Reverend Mothers, and both seemed equally invested in the Sisterhood's success. Dorotea's conviction earned her a number of followers, and Valya's ability to use the voice gave her a different sort of power. After Mother Rachella's death, Dorotea threatened to destroy her breeding program, and when she refused to yield to Valya, she met her end when the younger sister compelled her to take her life by using that power. Her inner circle of Tula, Francesca, and Kasha were there to see it happen, and Valya's initial reaction was sisterhood above all. Her justification is that her rival forced her hand by threatening to destroy everything Rachella built. Her goal for this has been vaguely referenced as identifying the best unions between powerful families so that they can influence generations to come and foster better leaders less prone to corruption and tyranny. We see them do that in this episode when they're talking about the Javicco and Natalya match, saying that he's more prone to stability than strength. With the right match like Natalya, prone to ambition and faith, those two will produce Ynez with all the traits they're after. But as is often the case with things related to Valya, the parts of these scenes that deliver the most dramatic weight are the apparently self-serving decisions she makes along the way. The way they quickly agree on a truth that allows them to avoid being detected by truth sense by not telling the whole story. The way she quickly shifts to saying sisters above all rather than sisterhood when she's alone with Tula. And the way she just comes out and says that when she's Mother Superior, they can do whatever they want. That's the stuff that really hits and stays with you. As far as the finale is concerned, though, where we're at is that these choices have consequences. They made them to try to preserve the sisterhood, and now it's under threat. Thanks to the work Raquella was able to do when her ego took over Lila, they now know they're dealing with a virus. Sister Nazir, the Suk doctor I mentioned earlier, who trained in the Sisterhood's ways first, believes it's a bioweapon that utilizes the infected person's fears. Tula's ears perk up when she suggests that Desmond may be the first victim rather than the person responsible for unleashing it. We learned in the last episode that he was her son from the time she spent with Ori, and in this episode we learn that the match between Houses Harkonnen and Atreides has the potential to be something remarkable, which is something we'll come back to. This news gets Tula on board because she wants to save him. And when she learns that it's a physical contagion, which means they can use their body chemistry to transmute it like Raquella did with the Rossack poison to create an antiviral. Tula volunteers, but Nazir believes her medical training would make her the better choice. Things start out as expected, with her transmuting the cells, but then the virus becomes active and fights back. As she loses the battle, she says she sees the monster of Arrakis and that the eyes are watching him. Initially, she thinks she can fight it, but then she says it's not human before she succumbs. Later, Tula asks Anarol, who believes they're dealing with thinking machines on a nanoscale. If that's the case and the tech is lying dormant in their cells waiting for a command before it kills, they could easily eliminate the threat by getting rid of Desmond. Of course, Tula doesn't want to do this because he's her son, but also because he wasn't born a weapon. Instead, she wants to find out who made him one, so she leaves Wallach IX to go to him. While she's on her way, she becomes the topic of conversation at the palace, where we learn that Kieran's father used to tell him a bedtime story about a monster that came to live among his people and how she murdered them all after a hunt. He endorsed some torture from the palace's resident monster Desmond before being put back in the suspensor cells where Ynez tries to break him out. She's caught by Natalya, who isn't sympathetic to her reasons for wanting to let him go, and then has her daughter arrested to teach her a lesson about power. In a way, this is just moving pieces around the board for what happens later in the episode, but it also sets up a lot more animosity between mother and daughter, which takes on greater importance by the end of the episode. It also sets off a chain reaction of events with Francesca, who Javicco was trying to get to stay in the palace even though her son had taken off to be with his fleet, all because he's under the influence of the imprint, rushing the news of Ynez's arrest of Valya. It's in these couple of scenes that we get the impression that her connection with Javicco isn't only about their plan. Valya says his time is over, but Francesca pushes back, saying that the imprint still holds, and she looks for ways forward that don't involve eliminating him. Valya reminds her that this was always a possible outcome, and we find out her plan is to take up Javicco on his offer of a visit and get herself arrested so she can get close to Ynez in the suspensor cells. She explains that Theodosia was bred by Thulaxan geneticists. The Sisterhood, and Valya in particular, took her in when she had nowhere to turn. We see her being welcomed at the palace by Francesca, and then her using her face dancer abilities to start turning into someone once she's inside. The final piece is to take Javicco out, and for that, Valya gives Francesca a Gom Jabbar to kill him quickly with metacyanide. While this is all coming together, things take a turn on Wallach IX in Tula's absence. Lila has been taken over by Dorotea, who quickly outwits acolyte Jen. We get more details about what happened in the aftermath of her death as she learns them herself, and see the sisters who are consumed by fear from the nightmares are ready to follow her now that she's back. Even Jen has a hard time accepting the reality that the Sisterhood was literally built on the corpses of Valya's enemies. This is the big reveal that the long-expected return of Mother Dorotea delivers. We watch in flashbacks as Valya and the gang approach her remaining followers as she tries to take take control. The background is that Raquel let the split exist and hoped they could reconcile to create a stronger order, something she asked about when she came back in the last episode and realized that it never played out. In the flashback, we see that both sides are further entrenched after Dorotea's exit. Valya's group urges her followers to fall in line and support her vision for the future. An implied ultimatum becomes real when she uses one of those cones of silence and they start using the voice to make them choose. If they won't follow Valya forward, they can follow Dorotea's example. Tula, Francesca, and Kasha all use the voice as well, and all of the sisters choose to slit their throats except for Sister Avila, who pledges to keep what happened a secret. Her involvement here recontextualizes all those times she checked with Tula to see if Valya knew what she was doing while she was away. In those scenes, she came off as a true believer in Mother Valya's vision, but it now appears she was motivated by fear. After Lila / Dorotea exposed the dead bodies, Sister Avila gives her the crowbar. She declares the Sisterhood has lost its way and pledges to return them to their righteous path. Then they break into the underground bunker and smash Anarul's console. This is pretty huge and sets up a real conflict for next season. It's hard to say exactly how the sisters will react based on where each of them end up, and how long Dorotea can even exert her control over Lila's body, although the examples of this happening in the book aren't one-off affairs. She has made Emmeline and her clique true believers, but it's also hard to say how much they can do while the Order has such a strong grip on all of the great houses through their truthsayers. It still kind of feels like a win for someone who frankly got a raw deal no matter how you feel about the character, but things go in the opposite direction for Javicco. Man, does this guy have a colossal bad day that just keeps getting worse. Francesca doesn't seem into his idea of taking Natalya's place when he first brings it up. Desmond isn't into her being around or the Emperor's plan to send his wife away on a tour of goodwill. He's not into his daughter getting arrested behind his back or Natalya's new plan to use Desmond to make him a puppet that answers to them. He's having trouble processing that when a guard approaches to tell him that the Mother Superior is there. He staggers into the throne room to find her sitting on the throne, which I imagine is enough for him to arrest her on the spot. The thing is, at first, he thinks she might be a saving grace. A notion she quickly shoots down by unloading on him in a way that he surely never experienced before. It's so brutal that I began wondering what the point was exactly after a while the first time I watched it. She calls him weak, says he always needed someone to pull the strings, and explains how they shaped his past since before he was born. It's around here that it seems like she might just be enjoying it and decided to pour it on, but after watching it again to take notes, I started to wonder if she might have picked up on the fact that she couldn't count on Francesca to go through with the assassination based on their conversation earlier. She decides to get personal, saying he was only an assignment for Francesca, his wife doesn't respect him, his daughter has lost faith in him, and his Bashar is only using him for his own ends. It's not his fault, it's who he is, it's in his blood, and most importantly, it's why they chose him. All of which she tells him because he doesn't matter. They just want Ynez on the throne, and that's it. This last part finally gets her arrested, but I think she also might be trying to break him if Francesca doesn't follow through on the plan. That's sort of what happens when he returns to her. He starts things off by telling her that Valya told him everything, and she responds by showing him the Gom Jabbar. She emphasizes that it's Valya's plan, not hers, but a needle dipped in poison is a murder weapon no matter how you slice it. He pulls his knife, and it doesn't slow her down at all. She keeps walking and asks him for it, saying the imprint won't let him hurt her, and she's confident about that. She explains Valya's plan was for her to kill him when he asks, but she seems to have lost her resolve, saying they can find a way through this together, but by then, he's at the point where he can't believe anything she says. How does he know this isn't part of the plan? Which goes back to the idea that she may have been improvising there when she really laid it on. He says it's a strange thing when you finally realize you've never known one true moment of freedom, but he can control this. And then he stabs himself to go out on his own terms. They put this together pretty well and made you feel a little something for the guy in his final moments. It wasn't a huge surprise since their stated plan has always been to put Ynez on the throne, and you would expect a major death in a season season finale, but that just gave the twist here a larger impact. While Francesca is bent over the dying emperor, sincerely pleading with him to stay with her, to not slip away, Natalya sneaks in and gom-jabars her instead. Talk about things falling into place for you. She felt her grip on her husband and the Imperium more broadly slipping away, and she walked into this perfect chance to take it back. She acts decisively, and Javicco sees what happened as he's bleeding out. She lets that happen, she's not going to save him, and you get the sense that she felt he betrayed her, so why not let him live with his choice? Things are staged in a way that makes it look like the Sisterhood could be responsible, and that's an angle she thinks she can play, not just to get away with killing Francesca, but also to realize her goals to get rid of them entirely. Kieran and Ynez are locked up next to each other in the cells. They see Valya being brought in and watch her use the voice to overtake her escort. Theodosia shows up behind her to take out the remaining security forces. She frees Ynez, and we see that Theodosia plans to take her place. She uses her face dancer abilities and now looks just like her, but the real Ynez doesn't want to leave Kieran behind. Valya tries to say that freeing him would be impossible. It throws off their plan, and the princess makes it plain that she's not asking. When Desmond learns she's been arrested, he knows they won't be able to hold her. He sounds the alarm and heads in that direction. As they free Kieran, Valya warns Theodosia that staying behind will be a great risk. They actually share a moment. She won't be able to protect her while she's fleeing with the princess and swordmaster. The acolyte reminds her this is why she brought her along in the first place. Valya's response about her will is a callback to the conversation in the first episode where Tula said she was her favorite because she was the one who was most like her, and Raquel's mention of Valya's will when she found out she never resolved her differences with Dorotea. Theodosia says, "Let me do what only I can do. Let me buy you time." The others fight their way out. Since the original plan to take the place of the princess will no longer work, Theodosia takes the place of a dying soldier and takes the opportunity to stab Desmond while saying sisterhood above all. It injures him, but as far as stab wounds go, he kind of just shakes it off for the most part. He hits her with an open hand that looks like it knocks her out. She's been changed into this dying soldier, so it's a little hard to tell. It almost looks like she dies, but then we hear him tell the guard to get this monstrosity up in suspension, so I believe she's still alive and will be his prisoner when we next see her. From there, it's a race to the end, with everyone converging on the spaceport where Valya has a contact that can smuggle the princess on a highliner. Desmond and his troops are in pursuit, so she sends the others ahead, intending to slow down their pursuers. She looks pretty badass using the voice to get through most of the guards, but when she tries to turn the last ones against Desmond, he comes out on top. He gets the showdown his face says he was hoping for, and she tells him if he says he's seen her end, why doesn't he show it to her? This sets up a substantial sequence, more than 8 minutes from the time she says this to when it's over, which I thought was really effective, and one of the things I liked about it most was its simplicity. It's atmospheric and leans into the experience she's having rather than the cryptic images we saw in previous visions. Since she asked, Desmond's happy to show her. And we see the virus start to spread in her as he seems to take a heavier toll than he had in previous encounters. She starts to fight it. In his weakened state, he falls to his knee. She falls to the ground. Then she has a vision of the snow on Lankavale. She's on the ice, not really dressed for the weather. Griffin calls her name. The younger actor, Jessica Barden, replaces Emily Watson, and then crawls to the hole in the ice and uses the voice to tell him to swim, just like the story we heard about the first time she used it. Tula, who's been in transit, arrives just as she pulls Griffin out of the water in her vision. She tells her sister she can't fight it because it's not human, it's a machine. She looks over to see her son convulsing on the ground while this is all happening. She tells Valya she has to let go of her fears. She acknowledges this and then is directly confronted with her biggest fear when Griffin says it was her fault. She killed him, she killed them all, and then he dies. It goes back and forth, and Tula encourages her, saying she can't run from it. She has to let it pass through her. And we see her do that, and then she changes back to her adult self and starts to recover. She sees the worm, and her sister says to let it come. The ice and cold turn to sand. The thumpers are there like the recording Javicco watched of Desmond being eaten by the worm. Then the blue lights and the darkness are there, in the position of the eyes with those same mechanical sounds. But then it turns out to be out of focus, and as it comes in, we see that it's a thinking machine above Desmond's body as he's strapped to an operating table. The machine removes his eye while it's still attached. He can watch this happen in real time, and it alters it, and when it's placed back in his head, there's a hooded figure standing in the distance watching. When she comes out of it, she tells Tula she knows what they did to him. She couldn't say who because she didn't see a face, but knows they were using a thinking machine and that they put another one inside him. He's their weapon, and his eye is the virus, so she tries to end this here by cutting it out with her knife. Tula has to use the voice herself to stop her, which I suppose we saw her use it on Dorotea's followers, but it's still a little surprising to see her use it on her sister. It's to defend the son she gave up, though, and once again, this seems to be the one area where she won't yield to Valya or her plans. She explains he's her son, which is somehow news to Valya, who is just as shocked as we are and wants to know why she would lie. She doesn't hold back, but lets her get there herself and realize that it was because she didn't want him around her. I've given you everything, but I couldn't give you him. This is all propped up by the great flashbacks from earlier in the episode. As far as it goes, the young Tula parts seem to be able to clear the bar of being good TV pretty consistently. And the way it makes us feel so invested in the character in the present day makes me wish there was more of that going on. The spin here is that she didn't just want her son around her sister. And when it comes down to it, she could have broken her hold on the Sisterhood at any time if she wanted to. She never did that because she believes they're the same. And in her words, they're two wolves born to feed with no care for the cost. If her son had the potential Anna Rule promised, he deserves something better than them. Valya gets it, but things are kind of past the point of damage control now. The fact that he's here now as he is after she gave him away is proof that someone else recognized his potential. Whoever's behind this, the hooded figure in the vision, it can't be a coincidence that they came across the perfect specimen for their plan. Apparently, they also knew of his potential and harnessed it. She believes that ending this now would be the best path forward, and to be honest, she could be right. Of course, Tula says no. She sees him as their victim and begs her sister to let her save him. She can resolve this threat if she's not afraid to trust her. After her experience, Valya is not afraid anymore, but she cautions that the reckoning is still upon them. She ends the conversation by saying if the shadows are where they want to fight, then that's where she'll go, and leaves the decision up to Tula. She tries to go to Desmond, who pushes her away initially. Then he lets her hug him and even returns the hug briefly before telling the guards to arrest her. The season closes with a sequence showing the Highliner arriving from Fold Space near Arrakis. A smaller ship goes down to the surface, and we see the three of them emerge with Valya telling Ynez that the path to their enemy begins here. So as I said at the beginning, I think this was the strongest episode of the series so far, and the ending does address some of my issues that I had with Valya as a character. Here we see that even though it's not well defined, she does have this dedication to something larger than herself. Hopefully next season they'll kind of flesh that out a little better. The stuff related to the sisters, and with Tula especially, is on a level that's a bit higher than the rest. But there's a lot of interesting things happening with Dorotea coming back, and certainly with the mysteries surrounding Desmond, which is really what kept my attention in the early going. I think that we'll see that some of this ties into what we'll see in the next movie. There's mentions of Talaxans, and I wouldn't be surprised since this hooded character is using thinking machines that he's Ixian or related to them in some way. During the rebellion, they did introduce a character who was selling thinking machines that was Ixian, so there's a tie-in there. But I've sort of been of the thinking that it was going towards more of the larger overarching Thinking Machine story that is mostly a contribution from Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son. So I'll be interested to see where they go next. Not a perfect season, but if you're going to do one thing, end well. And I think they did that here. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.